He first saw her through the fogged glass of the cafe window, not because she stood out in any obvious way, no striking dress, no dramatic flair, but because she didn't try to be anything she wasn't. She was leaning against the counter, chin in hand, stirring her coffee like she was waiting for something that wouldn't come, and for a brief second, she looked so painfully human that it made him pause mid-step. Her lipstick had faded, and there was a thread hanging from her coat sleeve. She looked like she hadn't slept well in a week, maybe two, but wasn't apologizing for it. That was what caught him. She wasn't hiding. She was imperfect. And somehow, in that, she looked more alive than anyone he'd seen in months. He was 22, a grad student who thought too much and slept too little, usually buried in the world of behavioral neuroscience and the far quieter universe of his own unspoken disappointments. She was a professor, literature, older, known to the faculty as Dr. Hale, to students as the Ice Queen, and to most people around campus as someone you didn't really know. He hadn't registered her name when she walked past him before, but the way she stirred her coffee that day, that gentle, repetitive motion like she was trying to disappear into it, made him walk inside and sit 2 seats down from her. Not too close. Not enough to spook her. Just close enough to hear the hum of her breath. He pretended to be reading. She pretended not to notice. The air between them stayed silent for 5 straight mornings. On the 6th, he beat her there and took the seat beside hers. "Good morning," he said, not looking at her. "You always take it black, stir for 3 minutes, then don't drink it." "Just an observation." She didn't respond. For a full minute, he thought he'd crossed an invisible line. Then, without turning, she said, "It's easier to stir than to drink. Drinking means you're ready for the day." He smiled without meaning to, and she finally turned to face him. Her eyes weren't warm or inviting, they were skeptical, faintly tired, and something else, something sharper. "You're a student," she said. "Not a question. A certainty." "Not yours," he replied, and when her brow lifted slightly, he added, "Neuroscience. I watch people too, but not the way you do." This time, a flicker of interest passed across her face. "And how do I watch people?" "Like you're trying to remember what they used to be. Before they disappointed you." Her laugh wasn't a laugh so much as an exhale that caught on something she hadn't let out in a while. "Clever," she said. "Dangerously so." He took a sip of his coffee, then shrugged. "Maybe just bored." She turned back to her untouched cup and finally lifted it to her lips. 1 sip. Then another. He pretended not to watch as her expression changed, just a touch, not enough to alarm her, but enough that he saw it, the way her jaw softened, the muscles around her mouth loosened, and her eyes dropped not from contempt but from something more vulnerable. The silence returned, but now it was companionable. It stretched, not awkwardly, but like two people breathing on the same wavelength for the first time. The next morning, she was already there when he arrived, and for the first time, she'd ordered 2 cups. "Figured I owed you one," she said, pushing a coffee his way. He didn't say thank you. He just nodded, sat, and they drank in silence. But this time, she didn't stir. She drank first. He didn't miss the difference. Neither did she. That week blurred into another. They didn't exchange names. Not yet. Names made things real, and whatever this was, it wasn't real. It was a pause in the middle of 2 very different lives, a space carved out by accident, fragile enough to break under the weight of labels. Then came the Thursday rainstorm. She arrived soaked, windblown, and furious with the sky. Her hair was a mess, shoes sloshing with each step. She looked ready to bite the world. He stood as she entered, silently took off his coat, and draped it around her shoulders before she could object. He didn't make a joke. Didn't flirt. Just did it and sat back down. It was the smallest gesture. No flourish. No fanfare. That was when it happened. The corner of her mouth pulled up slowly, like it forgot how. It wasn't performative. It wasn't polite. It was real. It reached her eyes, those eyes that always scanned the world like it owed her an apology. In that moment, she looked young, not in the way of age, but in the way of hope, of possibility. It was a smile she hadn't worn in years, and she knew it. She caught herself and looked away, suddenly shy. He didn't mention it. He just kept sipping his coffee like nothing changed, though everything had. She gave him her name the next day. Not the professional one. The real one. "Call me Celia." He told her his was Elias. And so it began. They kept it clean at first, unwritten rules carved in the silences they shared. Coffee only. Mornings only. No pasts, no futures, no titles. Just steam rising between two people who didn't ask for more than presence. But rules are like thin paper in water. Time makes them dissolve. And it wasn't long before the coffee turned into long walks to nowhere, shoulders brushing just enough to ask a question neither dared say aloud. The first mistake was meeting on campus after hours. It was past 9. The building was empty except for the echo of janitor carts and the occasional click of a distant heel. He had dropped by to pick up a flash drive, she had stayed late to finish grading, and somehow they both ended up in the faculty lounge, half-lit and humming with the kind of tension no one names. She poured him tea. He offered to help alphabetize essays. Neither cared about the tea or the essays. They stood close. Too close. And when he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers grazed her cheek. She didn't pull away. But the guilt came like a tide the next day. She was cold again. Short replies. No coffee. No smile. He waited an hour before realizing she wouldn't come. He found her the next afternoon by the faculty lot, watching the leaves swirl on the pavement like they were trying to climb back onto the trees. "I crossed a line," he said, softly. "No." "You reminded me it existed," she answered, eyes fixed ahead. "That's worse. It should have ended there." The age difference, the university's ethics board, her tenure, his scholarship, it all added up to disaster. But emotions don't respect spreadsheets. And their distance only pulled tighter at the invisible cord between them. Elias wasn't naive. He'd been in relationships before, short, impulsive, messy ones. But this was different. Celia didn't need him. She never asked him to rescue her from anything. She had survived too much alone to pretend otherwise. Yet there was something in her still fighting ghost she never named, and every time he saw that flicker of doubt behind her eyes, he felt a compulsion to stay, to witness it, to hold space for it. He never asked about her marriage. She never mentioned it. But the outline was there in how she flinched at sudden laughter, how she looked away from couples holding hands. The woman had armor. Not the kind you saw, but the kind built layer by layer from betrayal and silence. For Elias, the wound was fresher, but no less real. His parents were public people. Local journalists, known in their small circle for dinner parties and morally upright columns. Their disappointment in him had been as sharp as it was subtle. When he told them he'd rejected law school to study cognition and behavior, they stopped saying they were proud. When he stopped going to church, they stopped calling him altogether. Celia became the first person he didn't have to explain himself to. She didn't ask for faith or perfection. She asked for honesty. That was her currency. And he gave it to her, little by little, like sand through a closed fist. Still, the world outside wasn't kind. Rumors started on campus. Whispers about the professor and the boy. Nothing confirmed. Just raised eyebrows and sudden silences when either entered a room. Her colleagues grew stiff around her. His lab supervisor asked vague, loaded questions about influences. Then the letter came. A typed note in a manila envelope, slipped under her office door. No signature. Your behavior has not gone unnoticed. Ended before someone else does. She didn't show him the letter at first. She planned to walk away quietly, to cut it clean before it turned into ruin. But when he knocked on her office door after hours, rain dripping from his hair, eyes frantic, she couldn't lie. "I need you to be safe," she said, handing him the envelope. "This won't end in poetry. It ends with hearings and reputations destroyed. I can't let you lose yours." He read it twice, then folded it neatly and tucked it into his coat pocket. "I'd rather lose a reputation than regret never knowing you," he said. "And you're the first person who's ever made me feel like I wasn't a waste of potential." She stepped back, stunned, like he'd struck her. But the blow wasn't pain, it was recognition. "I don't know how to be loved gently," she whispered. "Then I'll go slow," he replied. "I'm not in a hurry." It was a promise. And a mistake. Because neither of them knew that someone, somewhere, was watching more closely than they thought. There's a kind of honesty that only exists at night. The world softens under streetlights. Words come easier when they aren't weighed down by morning expectations. That's how it began to shift, from stolen mornings to midnight drives. From coffee to confessions. Celia drove a faded blue Volvo, the kind with a cassette deck and cracked leather seats. It smelled like eucalyptus and old books. Elias loved that smell. It didn't pretend to be new. Like her, it wore its history openly. They'd meet off campus now, after hours, in parking lots near the edge of the city, in little diners where no one asked questions, in the quiet back roads behind the reservoir. Nothing loud. Nothing flashy. Just the soft rumble of tires and the hum of a conversation they hadn't dared have by daylight. They talked like the world wasn't watching. About the lives they almost had. About the versions of themselves they'd quietly buried. She told him about the miscarriage. "I was 29, she said, hands on the steering wheel like a confessional altar. He said we were ready. Then we weren't. Then I wasn't enough. I taught the following semester with blood still in my veins that wasn't mine anymore." He didn't interrupt. He let her speak into the night. She told him how she'd built a life out of silence, how she learned to wear control like a uniform, how every compliment felt like a test, how the word respectable had been weaponized to keep her obedient. "I forgot what it was like to want anything," she said. "You reminded me. That's both a blessing and a curse." He told her about the time he almost jumped. Not dramatically. Just a quiet winter night, senior year, standing on the edge of the old bridge near his parents' house, staring down at the black water and wondering if being brilliant was worth being lonely. "I never wanted to die. I just didn't want to keep pretending I was okay." Her hand had moved to his then. No dramatic clutching. Just fingers resting, holding enough to say "I hear you." There was no sex yet. Not because they didn't want to, but because what they shared was heavier than lust. It was intimacy with teeth. Desire wrapped in wounds. But the night didn't stay theirs for long. It happened in late spring. Just after 11. They were parked behind a closed bookstore on Elm Street, windows cracked, stereo low. He'd leaned in to kiss her cheek, a small, wordless thing. Nothing obscene. Just affection that had waited too long. She had turned her face, met his lips fully, and in that moment brief, suspended time stood still. Except it hadn't. Behind them, half hidden in the dark, a figure paused. Just for a second. Long enough to see. Not long enough to identify. Elias saw them in the mirror, the flash of a hoodie, a slight recoil of surprise, and then they were gone. Gone before he could catch a face. But real. Real enough that the fear slid back into her like a returning illness. They drove in silence after that. No music. No conversation. Just two heartbeats thudding against what could no longer be ignored. "Someone saw," she said finally, voice hollow. "Doesn't mean they'll say anything. But they could. And that's all it takes." He reached for her hand, but she didn't give it. She was already somewhere else. Calculating. Preparing. Armoring up. The next day, she didn't show up at the cafe. Or the bookstore. Or anywhere he waited. He texted. No reply. Called. Straight to voicemail. He walked past her office 5 times. The lights stayed off. When she finally answered 3 days later, her voice was strained, brittle. "I need time. Please understand. That night, he stood outside her building, staring up at her window, wondering if she was staring down at him. If she could see the way he waited, not like a boy in love, but like a man who had finally found a truth worth being broken for. The silence between them stretched into something neither of them could name. But it wasn't over. It never really had a chance to be. Because someone saw. And someone remembered. And soon, someone would speak. They say secrets rot from the inside. But the truth is, they explode. All it takes is the right room, the wrong person, and too many people pretending not to watch. The pressure had been building for weeks. Celia kept her distance, wore professionalism like a second skin, taught her classes with surgical precision, smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. Elias stayed invisible, more focused in the lab, quieter around his peers, pretending he didn't check his phone every hour for something more than silence. And yet, the unspoken remained, the memory of lips meeting in the dark, the knowledge of being seen, the shape of each other in absence. Then came the department conference. Held in one of those downtown hotels with too much gold trim and not enough sincerity, it was meant to be a celebration, cross-disciplinary, overfunded, and utterly exhausting. Faculty mingled, students networked, and everyone pretended they weren't watching everyone else. Celia was there, elegant in a deep green dress that softened her edges just enough to be disarming. Elias was there too, under the guise of assisting his advisor, badge clipped to his chest like armor. They'd agreed beforehand, no contact. Not even eye contact. Not here. Not tonight. But the room had other plans. He saw her across the crowd, speaking to the dean, laughing lightly. It wasn't the real laugh, not the one she gave him, but the practiced one, polished, distanced, safe. Still, it gutted him. Because she looked so far away, and he was standing just 30 feet from her. Then he saw it. The student. She wasn't one of his friends. Barely even familiar. But her posture gave it away, stiff, deliberate, eyes bouncing between him and Celia with a knowing calculation. The hoodie was different, but the face matched the blur from that night. She was the one who saw. And she wasn't keeping it to herself anymore. Within minutes, a whisper moved through the crowd like oil on water. Not loud. Not shouted. But sharp. Intentional. You didn't need volume when you had venom. By the time Celia made her way to the refreshment table, the energy had changed. A hush followed her like a shadow. Colleagues glanced at each other and said nothing. One even stepped back, subtly, like distance equaled virtue. She knew instantly. And so did he. They locked eyes for the first time that night and neither looked away. Elias moved before thinking, threading through the crowd, each step defiant. Celia didn't stop him. She didn't warn him. She just stood there, glass in hand, breath held. And when he reached her, he didn't lower his voice. You want me to walk away right now, I will. But if you don't, I'm not pretending anymore. The room went dead quiet. It wasn't a scream. It didn't need to be. She looked at him for a long time. So long it hurt. And then she did something no one expected. She turned to face the crowd. And she spoke. I am not ashamed of who I love, she said. No microphone. Just voice. Clear, measured. I am ashamed of a culture that turns privacy into spectacle and dignity into scandal. Her words were calm, but they cut. No trembling. No apology. Just the weight of truth dropped like a stone in still water. I never abused my position. I never asked for special treatment. What we shared as equals, with full knowledge of the risk. The dean stepped forward, lips pursed, ready to speak. But Elias cut him off. And what risk is that? Loving someone older than me? Wiser than me? Stronger than any person in this room who whispers behind her back and pretends they've never made mistakes of their own? A gasp. A few eyes widened. Some left the room entirely. But others stayed. Others listened. Celia's hand touched his lightly, not to stop him. Not to silence him. just to say thank you. It didn't fix anything. It didn't stop the investigation that followed. It didn't silence the rumors or repair reputations or keep her name out of reports. But for that one moment under a chandelier too bright, in a room that wanted a scandal but got a confession, they stood together. Seen. Real. Undeniable. The days that followed were full of glassy smiles and sharpened statements, of inboxes flooded with concern masked as inquiry, and closed-door meetings where truth was rearranged to fit institutional comfort. Neither of them were fired. That would have made things messy. Instead, Celia was placed on a review period, her classes reassigned, her title politely stripped of its weight. Elias, being a student and therefore less liable, was offered resources. Counseling. Academic advisors. A quiet nudge to rethink his path. They never officially called it misconduct. No rules were technically broken. But the message was clear, this was not the kind of story that could be allowed to end gently. They met less after that. Not out of shame, but fatigue. It's hard to sustain intimacy under fluorescent lights and heavy glances. But some nights, when the noise died down, she'd still come to him, hair undone, coat unbuttoned, eyes softer. They wouldn't talk about the conference. Or the investigation. Or what came next. They'd just sit. Sometimes on the couch, legs tangled. Sometimes in bed, backs turned. Breathing the same air. I used to think love was supposed to save you, she said once, lying beside him in the dark. Now I think maybe it's just supposed to see you. And hold you there. Even when the world's ready to drop you. He didn't answer. Just held her tighter. Elias never told his parents. He didn't have to. His mother called him on a Sunday morning, voice already 2 steps past disappointment. We saw the article, she said. There wasn't much more. They didn't disown him. But they did withdraw. Emotionally. Financially. The kind of withdrawal that doesn't slam the door, it just closes it slow, with finality. He didn't tell Celia the full weight of that fallout. She had enough battles of her own. But she knew. She always knew. One evening, she handed him a letter. Folded once. Handwritten. If this is too much, she said, you don't have to say anything. Just know it's okay to walk away before it breaks us both. He read it that night, sitting on the hood of his car behind her apartment, moonlight bending around the edges of her words. It wasn't a breakup letter. It was a surrender. An offering. Her way of saying, I love you enough not to need you to stay. But he stayed. For a while longer. Until it wasn't a scandal anymore. Until it was just a strange, whispered story that lost heat with each retelling. The summer came. He graduated. She didn't attend the ceremony. They agreed on that. But he saw her watching from a distance, behind the fence, half hidden by the crowd. It was enough. They didn't talk for 3 months. Then, one evening in early September, he sent her a single message, want to get coffee? She replied 5 minutes later, you still take it black? That's all it was. A coffee. A conversation. No confessions. No decisions. Just 2 people who had once meant something extraordinary to each other, sitting across from the same table where it all began. There were no dramatic goodbyes. No final kiss. No vows to try again someday. Just the kind of silence that holds both history and peace. As he walked away that day, Elias looked back once. She didn't wave. She just smiled. That same imperfect, real smile he gave her back at the beginning. And it was enough. For now. Maybe forever. Or maybe not. Because the question still lingered in the quiet between them, unspoken but alive. What if this wasn't the end?